when Elena was born, she was my first one that was the loss. I went back to work less than a week later, right?
Okay.
I did not grieve. I did not want to be a part of that. I wanted to just get busy, which can
It
help
happens.
some people.
Mm-hmm.
And then it wasn't until I got pregnant with Evelyn that I realized that, like, oh, I need to do some stuff here.
Welcome to Female Voices, Life and Loss, a podcast dedicated to women from all walks of life. Whether you're navigating through loss, seeking growth, or simply looking for a place to feel understood, you've come to the right space. Each week, we provide compassionate guidance, share diverse stories, and offer practical advice to help you heal, grow, and thrive. No matter where you are on your journey, we're here to walk with you. Let's grow together.
Hello, Lindsey. Welcome to Female Voices Life and Loss. I am excited to get to know you. Wayna set up this podcast recording, and I don't really know a lot about you. We chatted a few minutes, but I'm excited to get to know you. So welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me on here. It was, kind of great getting to know Lowena and kind of sharing a little piece of my story. I can remember chatting with her in my office after work one day, and we kind of shared both of our experiences. And so, kind of passionate about supporting moms and pregnancy and all the elements of it. And so, this is a perfect fit.
Awesome. Perfect. So before we go into all of that story of motherhood for you and all of those things, share a little bit about who is Lindsey? Who is this beautiful woman that I'm going to get to know a little bit today, outside being a mom?
Yeah.
What else is there to know about Lindsey?
I am a combat veteran. I was a medic in the Air Force for 6 years, and I had 2 deployments. I worked in the ICU in Afghanistan, in Bagram, Afghanistan. I also worked in labor and delivery for 3 years when I was first in the military at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So that gave me a lot of really good knowledge base for all of my pregnancy-related experiences. So I'm so grateful for those 3 years and all the friendships that I have. And then I also worked in all the specialty clinics, so primarily under nephrology. So kidney specialist, hematology, oncology. So that was kind of my medical background. I met my husband when I was in the military. We were both in a class to go be moved into the ICU. And I'm very competitive academically. And so I'm not shy to raise my hand. I'm kind of like the Hermione Granger of a classroom. And he was answering the math class questions behind me. I could hear him whisper the correct answer, but he would get it before me. And I was like, who is this kid sitting back there answering the math questions? But he's not saying them out loud either, because he's very modest, whereas I am a little bit more open. And so we met, and we lived separately for 2 years. He moved to Germany. I moved to Las Vegas. And then I got out of the military and joined him in Germany. And after my last deployment to Afghanistan, I thought I was burnt out on medicine, or I was a little burnt out on medicine. And so I got my degree, my undergrad, in social work. However, I did not immediately start working as a social worker. I spent 8 years up in Alaska managing the fitness center on base. And I managed civilian and airmen, and we had a lot of baby airmen, and I'm pretty sure every female airman that came up there was pregnant at some point in time. And so I became the mother of all airmen because they're so far away from their moms. I supported all of them because I had so much experience with labor and delivery. I literally, was kind of acting as a doula / mom / sister / partner for one of my airmen when she delivered her baby. And so did a lot of breastfeeding support up there as well, and, making meals and all that stuff for all my baby airmen who were having babies of their own. So we did that, and then I got my master's degree in social work, and and now I'm working for a very large nonprofit, and I specialize in trauma. So I'm an EMDR-trained therapist, and help people work through their trauma, whatever that background looks like for them.
Awesome. Wow. You have a lot that you have been through, done all the things, but an expert for sure in a lot of things is what I will say. So, well, we're going to dive into that a little bit. So we are going to talk a little bit. I know that you are a mom of living children, if that's correct. But that was not an easy journey to go down. So I want you to share a little bit about that. We talked a little bit ahead of time. I know how many pregnancies, I know how many live births, that kind of thing. But I want you to share that story, because it sounds like I would love to know more about that, because it sounds like it was quite a difficult journey to go down.
Yeah. So my husband and I, when we were just, in our first year of marriage, decided to start casually trying to have kids. And so we stopped all prevention, and we're just, not really turning it into a science experiment or worried about ovulation trips or anything like that.
Sure.
And that went on for about 2 years before I was like, I feel like something should have happened by now. So we went to the doctors and started doing kind of all the workups to get everything figured out. And everything was fine on my end. Everything was fine on his end. They're like, well, we don't really know. Give it 6 more months. And so we started doing kind of the ovulation strips and tracking all of that. Still nothing was happening for us. And so we went, back then it was Clomid is what we used, in Clomid, trigger shots, and timed intercourse, which doesn't that sound super exciting?
So romantic.
And by this time I was in my final semester of my undergrad degree. And so, but every time that I took the trigger shot, I got a migraine that would knock me out for 3 days. And so I can remember going through that, and it was my finals week lined up with my trigger shot, and I had to choose if I could be present for my finals or if I was going to be knocked out for 3 days and just skip the trigger shot and hope something happened. And that was our 4th round of Clomid, and it was like, what do I do here? I remember struggling with that choice when the first 3 rounds, and they were going to let us do 6 rounds of Clomid before we moved on to IUI, intrauterine insemination. But it so happened that we did get pregnant on that 4th round of Clomid, in which I skipped the trigger shot.
So what did you decide?
Own. Okay. Yeah, and avoided the headache and all that. And we were just so excited, completely over the moon, thrilled. We waited to kind of tell everybody. And then our insurance, because we were going through the infertility, offered the genetic testing. And so we're like, yeah, sure, let's go ahead and do that. So we went ahead and got the labs drawn for the genetic testing. And then before those results came back, my husband and I's really, really good friend passed away unexpectedly in the Baja 500. He was a Marine veteran that had, pretty complex PTSD and mental health issues, but he had done the work to get through it. He had been through treatment. He was such a good example to so many other veterans out there. And he was participating in a race with a program called Warrior Built, who helped veterans kind of recover through their mental health and physical health, because they have a lot of amputees that they work with as well, through kind of these outdoor recreation activities. And up in Alaska, we're big dirt bikers. My husband and I both rode dirt bikes all the time. And that's kind of how we knew Noah. And so he had gone down to do the Baja 500, and it was just an insanely hot day. And he passed away most likely of a heat stroke. And so we, at the time, had been planning to do, when you're overseas in the military, it's called OCONUS, and you get cot leave. I know there's so many military jargon, so if I say something and you're like, wait, just please let me know. But cot leave is continuous overseas tours, COT. So when you go overseas to overseas, which we were Germany to Alaska, so we had 3 overseas tours, you are authorized 30 days of leave, of cot leave. And so we were going to take our cot leave on our motorcycle, and we had never really done the East Coast very much. So we are going to ship our bike, our big 2-up bike, to the East Coast and ride up and down. Well, then I got pregnant. We're like, okay, we're still going to do the trip. We'll just do it in a car and, camp and do fun things. And so that was the plan. And so we had flown down, and then they had the services for Noah. So we flew to Washington State, where he was from, to go to the services. And my phone rings when I'm standing in Noah's mom's house, and the guys are all out setting up the chairs and stuff for the funeral at the church. So they're not there. And just me and all the other wives that flew in came down from Alaska. So I was surrounded by friends. But my phone rang, and it was the nurse, and obviously I knew her very well. We had been working with, I texted her my menstrual cycle every single, like, hey, my period started, and she's like, take this drug on Thursday, and do this on Friday. And so she called, and I was like, oh, I'm going to find out the gender of the baby right now. This is so exciting, And so I just walked away from the group because I didn't want to, they're all morning, and I walked away, and the nurse called, and she's like, I'm so sorry, Lindsey, it's triploidy syndrome. And I was like, what? And I had a friend with XXX syndrome, or their daughter had XXX syndrome, and I thought that's what she was talking about. I was like, no, it's okay, some developmental delays and things like that, but she lives on her own, she's functioning, and they're like, no, it's triploidy. And I'm like, well, what is triploidy? I never heard of that before. And she said there's an extra chromosome on every pair. So instead of 2 chromosomes, there's 3. And she said it's 100% fatal. And I don't remember hitting the floor, but I hit the floor. And my friend came in, and she's just like looking at me, and I'm sitting on the floor, and I hang up from the nurse, and she's like, Lindsey, what's wrong? And I told her, I said, just get Travis. And so we got out of there because I didn't want to make a scene. Like, I just beelined it for the car, and we got back to our hotel room, and so.
Yeah. Super, super hard.
Yeah.
News.
And mind you, this was 2016, which was the elections between Clinton and Trump, and abortion was a huge topic at that time, kind of like it is now. But it was kind of the first time in my adult life that abortion had been in the public eye and everywhere on social media and things like that. And here I was with 100% fatal pregnancy that had many risks to me. And so I was just like, what do I do here? And so we went to the funeral. All of that was fine. We flew back to Pennsylvania because at that point in time, we were with my husband's family, and I started bleeding. And I had started bleeding in Washington State. So I went to the ER there thinking I was going to have a miscarriage. We went to Pennsylvania, started bleeding again, thinking I was having a miscarriage. And I was like, if this is going to happen, I just want to be home with my family. No, my husband's families, they're all wonderful. My mother-in-law has also went through loss, and so she was so understanding. But I was like, I just want to be home. And so we went back to Iowa. We had traveled all over the lower 48, and this supposed to be 30 days of us on this grand epic adventure turned into just chaos. And we were we went back to Iowa, and then we were going to drive up to Minnesota for some of my husband's friend's wedding, who he was friends with when in Germany, right? They were stationed in Germany and they were getting married, and we were supposed to be going up there, and we got, I don't know, an hour away from my parents' house, and both of us just felt miserable. And we were trying to book the hotel room and we couldn't get through. And I just remember being like, this is too much. And it was just literally a phone call that we couldn't make. But both of us were so incredibly overwhelmed at that point in time that we turned around and went back to my parents' house. And then I went to the emergency room in Iowa as well, again, for bleeding and back pain. And I was like, I just want to go home to my doctors, my house. I just want to be back in Alaska. Like, that's all I want. And we planned for my mom to come up when I would need her. She was ready at the drop of a hat to show up to kind of support me, which is a theme in my life. I have a really great mom. And so we changed our tickets, we went back to Alaska, checked in with all of our doctors. And they're like, well, it's 99.9% accurate, but, we'll do the genetic testing, the genetic screening and amniocentesis, all that stuff. But we won't do the amniocentesis until 20 weeks. And I was like, okay, cool. So it was 12 weeks when I found out.
Okay. That's what I was wondering. How far along were you? Okay.
Yeah. And so that was an absolute miserable time because I was showing. Everybody knew that we had wanted a kid. And so they see this pregnant belly and they're like, congratulations. And it's like, no, not really. She's not going to survive. And so we kind of navigated that as best I could. I had an amazing employer. Amazing. I was so set up to survive this experience. My doctors were absolutely wonderful, loved them. My employer was the most supportive person ever. Like, I literally had just started my job. My health insurance kicked in after 30 days, 8 days before I delivered her. And so, yeah, super supportive employer, super supportive friends, and like the best mom you could ever ask for. And my husband was great at that time too. And so a very, very, very supportive environment around me.
That's
and so we went, but I started to lose my mind by this time, always constantly expecting a miscarriage. It's stressful. It was so hard. And so finally, a maternal fetal specialist agreed to do the amniocentesis before 20 weeks. And so we had that done at 17 weeks. And called my mom up because we were just going to await confirmation, and then I was going to have a second term abortion. Because of the risks of the pregnancy, I had risks of severe preeclampsia, and like my fertility was at risk. My future fertility was at risk, as well as like a myriad of other things that kind of come along with this type of pregnancy. And so, so we did the amniocentesis, and the results came back that she was 100% normal, that there was no triploidy syndrome, that there wasn't anything wrong. She was a little small at the amniocentesis appointment, but she was, other than that, perfectly normal. The placenta was normal. Everything was fine. And that was at like 17 and 2 or 17 and 3 weeks pregnant. And my mom was there because she was ready to support me through an abortion. And we went out, bought everything. The clothes, the furniture, the baby bed, everything. We went to Babies R Us and cleaned them out and got it all set up and ready. And then carried on with the pregnancy. My sister came to Alaska to visit us. At that time, I told you there was tons of people visiting all the time.
Yeah.
And I just didn't feel good. And then I had started having visual disturbances. So like little floaty things, which is a sign of high blood pressure. And obviously I'm a medic. I have all that stuff at my house. So I start taking my blood pressure one day. I'm by myself getting ready to go into work. I was working in the evening that day. And I was like, man, this can't be right. Like there's something wrong with my cuff. I'm getting like 200 over 100. That's not right. So I called my husband. I was like, hey, I'm just going to go in and get my blood pressure checked before work today.
Mm-hmm.
And so I go in and stop in, and they're like, honey, you got to calm down. Like your pressures are so high. And I was like, yeah, I don't know. And so then they sent me down to labor and delivery. And I went down to labor and delivery, and the pressures were really high. There was so much protein in my urine. It was just like, which means preeclampsia, essentially.
Yeah.
And then they could not find the heartbeat via Doppler ultrasound. And then they did a visual ultrasound, and there was no heartbeat. And I can remember in that moment, because I had been on the other side, I've been the technician looking for a heartbeat and not finding one.
Yeah.
In that moment, I felt bad for the nurse.
Mm.
I did. I think
Because you've been there.
was just like, oh my God, that sucks so bad. That sucks so bad to be the one. And then my doctor came in right afterwards because she was just like, I don't see a heartbeat, but we're going to have the doctor check. And he walked in and he saw, and I knew what I was looking at. I've looked at ultrasounds. I've done I did all of that. I knew there was no heartbeat. And Dr. Hinkle walked in and he's like, we don't need to do another one. I'm so sorry. There's no heartbeat. And right when he said that, my husband walked in behind the doctor. And so it turns out, well, I went through the whole loss. I had severe preeclampsia. I was on 2 different IV antidepressants and MEG, and still throwing triple over triple blood pressures. And so in all the people that I had taken care of with preeclampsia, I was sicker than all of them because the meds just weren't working to bring my heart rate down. And magnesium is a terrible med to be on. Just kind of, it just makes you feel awful, and it does. And I always felt bad for the moms that were on it, and then I was on it, and I'm like, yeah, that was a true level of empathy.
Why did they have you on that?
Magnesium, it's
I thought that was to stop. Say it again.
It's to prevent seizures.
Okay.
Yeah.
But do they use magnesium also to stop labor? If someone goes into labor too earlier, is it something else? I thought that was magnesium as well.
It could. I don't know. We only
ask my daughter.
Yeah, you have to ask them. Been out of that world for so long that I really don't remember what we did to labor.
Yeah, I thought that's what she was on, to stop labor. I could be wrong in saying that, but I remember her making her super sick. Just feeling
it does.
like
it makes you feel miserable.
Like you have a flu or just run over by a truck.
Yeah, your body just feels just heavy and miserable.
Yeah.
When I worked labor and delivery, we didn't have a NICU, and so we never stopped labor. So we only took the moms that were 36 full term, happy, healthy, good outcome pregnancies at that point, or stillborn. So if somebody came in that was like 32 weeks or something like that, we sent them on their way to a hospital with
somewhere
a NICU.
Else.
So I didn't do a whole lot of stopping at that point in time.
Makes sense.
But yeah, so I was on the magnesium. I delivered her, and then I couldn't pass the placenta because it had grown. So what it turns out to be, and we don't know this for sure, but what makes the most sense to me and my doctors, and what, based off of all the ultrasounds and everything, it was a twin partial molar pregnancy. So my daughter was Elena Rose, and she was completely normal, well-formed, but there was a twin molar pregnancy, and the molar pregnancy is where like the triploidy came from. So like a molar pregnancy is just kind of like a genetic jumble, like a tumor essentially. And so the molar pregnancy was in the placenta. And so while everything was normal at 17 weeks when I had the amniocentesis, the placenta just took over at that point in time, and it grew to be the size of a 36-week placenta. And when I delivered, I was just at 20 weeks. And so the placenta just took over all the nutrients, and essentially, the baby didn't get access to any nutrients. And then I got severe preeclampsia on top of it. So I delivered the baby, and the bereavement nurse came in and, dressed her and did all the pictures and everything. And it was so perfect, though, because my mom was there because we thought I was having a second term abortion. My best friend, Liz, I've been best friends since preschool. I was just talking to you about her.
Yeah.
She was in Washington State in Seattle at the airport when I got admitted, when they found out there was no heartbeat. And I called her and she said, "Do you want me to come?" I said yes. And she went from one gate where she was supposed to go home to North Carolina to the next gate over was to Anchorage, Alaska. She walked up to the gate, told them what happened, and they put her on the flight. And so, yeah.
Wow. It was like a little miracle there.
Absolutely. I tell you, I was so well supported by the universe for this experience, because my daughter is Elena Rose, and she was named after my mom, whose middle name is Elaine, and Elizabeth, who's Elizabeth Rose. So the two people that she was named for were there for me for the delivery.
That's beautiful.
And she was named before we knew that she was gone. So it worked out perfect. So Liz was there to support, like, my mom, because it's hard for my mom to have to go through that. And my husband, they were supporting me and she was supporting them. So she was supporting me too through all that recovery. But yeah, so then I ended up having to go in and have a D&C after I delivered her because for a retained placenta. So
yeah. Wow. So you were in the hospital then for, I would assume, a while with that extra procedure.
Yep. So then, and then it's crazy though, because I was on the RTS team, the Resolve Through Sharing team, when I worked labor and delivery. And so anytime there was an IUFD, which is intrauterine fetal demise, I would get called in. And I was like an amateur photographer back then, and they didn't really have all those programs that they have now. This was almost 20 years ago. All the programs that they have now for, like, Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep is one that I'm sure you're familiar with, that they come in and do the pictures after you have a loss. And so I volunteered to do that. So if a woman came in and she had a loss, I would come in, I would stay with her, didn't matter how long, throughout the labor and the delivery process, and then I would do all the pictures and the support on the afterwards. So I was on that team. And the other program that we used was the Peace Bear Project, which was this family that they lost a child. I don't know the specifics of their story, but they created a nonprofit so that every mom that leaves the hospital doesn't leave empty-handed. So you get a Peace Bear. And so I used to give women this Peace Bear when I worked labor and delivery. And then after Elena was born, I got my own Peace Bear. And so it has peace written on its paw and the little yellow ribbon around its neck. And so this is our Elena bear. But yeah, so I got the Peace Bear.
Yeah. Do they do those? So if you're listening to this podcast and you want to see the Peace Bear, you'll have to go to YouTube to see that, so you can see the video just for the listeners. But do they do the Peace Bear at the same weight of what?
No,
the baby
I do know that there are different programs.
There are
but
some of those.
Yeah. So this one comes home with you from the hospital. And so that's they're all kind of the same.
Okay.
But that is what my memorial tattoo is based on, which was so healing and cathartic. I'm a big tattoo girly. There's just something healing about that. But yeah, I have the peace bear, and then on the other paw, because on one of its paws is a patchwork, like flannel patch that says peace. And then in my tattoo on the other paw, I have one of Noah's, a replicate of one of Noah's tattoos. So at Noah's funeral, all of our friends from Alaska went and got some of Noah's tattoos replicated on themselves, because they're all a bunch of tattoo lovers as well. But my husband does not do tattoos. He is very much not a tattoo type of fella. And so then I got the tattoo. So I have a little shamrock on the other paw, which is what Noah had as well. So to kind of represent that whole summer. That whole summer, it was Noah and going through everything, the ups and downs with Elena and the loss of Elena. And then I think I was still home. I hadn't even returned to work. And I had another really good friend who had stage 3 cervical cancer. And she had 2 little girls. And I've always been, she doesn't have a great family. She had kind of a rough childhood, and my family was always just kind of that like anchor of support and who she always looked up to for like, looking up to my mom to how to be a good mom. And she's a wonderful mom, but she called me and she's like, I just need to make sure that you and Travis are still on board to take my girls if something happens. And because she was going through cancer treatments, and I'm like, yes, absolutely. Like, we will take care of the girls. So it was just a really rough summer. And 2016 was such a hard summer for us.
So there's lots of questions I could ask about that, but I do want to know, before we started the recording, you shared how many pregnancies that you had and the number of living children that you have. So I wanted to share a little bit more about that. Just for the fact that with Elena, you went through 5-6 rounds of Clomid. Was that what you continued to have to do? Even though with the last round you didn't really do that, you became pregnant on your own.
Yeah.
So share with us kind of the rest of that
my fertility journey.
Motherhood journey. Yeah,
for sure. So when you have a pregnancy, the molar pregnancy, like what I had, the triploidy syndrome, you're at risk for gestational trophoblastic disease, GTD, which turns into gestational trophoblastic cancer. And so they were adamant that I could not get pregnant until I had not been pregnant for a year. And I was like, I've been trying to get pregnant for 4 years and you want me to wait another year? Like, I can't do that. So I had to have weekly HCG levels until I got my HCG level down to 0. And then, remember that competitive academically piece of me, I went into all the journals, medical journals, and did all the research on the instances of gestational trophoblastic disease recurring after an HCG level of 0. And I printed out all the articles, and I went back into my OB and I was like, look, like the risk here is so minimal. Can I start trying to get pregnant? Because they wanted me on 2 forms of birth control at all times. Because you cannot tell if it's gestational trophoblastic disease or a pregnancy. They both show up as HCG, right? And then until a pregnancy develops enough that you can see it on ultrasound, but by that point in time, it would be like a higher risk type of thing to treat for the gestational trophoblastic disease. Anyway, so I took all this information in to my OB and I was like, let me do this. And she's like, okay, 6 months after 0 level, you can try to get pregnant. And I was like, solid. And then I think I waited 4 months. But I knew, that, they weren't going to let me return to fertility treatments right away. And so we did the 2 forms of birth control for a little while, and then we ended up getting pregnant with our daughter Evelyn on our own. So we didn't have to have any fertility treatments. We got pregnant with her, and I knew that I had PTSD. Didn't tell the doctors that I was pregnant, my VA doctors, but I went to the VA doctors for just my annual check-in, and I just fell apart, which is probably all the hormones that happen as well. But I just fell apart and then completely detached from my daughter's pregnancy. Physically, the pregnancy was fine. It was easy. But mentally, I just wasn't like super attached to it because of my experience with Elena.
Sure.
I found out on my birthday that I was pregnant with her. And I remember being excited in the morning, and I drove around this corner to drive into work. And by the time I went around the corner, it was done, shut down mentally from that. Like, I couldn't buy any clothes. I remember calling my sister and be like, can you just, like, when we found out it was girls, can you send me all my niece's clothes? She's like, they're just all garage sale clothes. And I was like, that's not it. It's not the money. It's not anything. It's like, I can't mentally buy anything for this kid. I just can't do it. And so I didn't. And then, she came and everything was fine. And we attached and bonded and had a beautiful, I didn't have any postpartum issues or anything like that. So she's now 7. She was born in 2017. I lost a pregnancy after the heartbeat. So it was around 10 or 11, maybe even 12 weeks. Over New Year's. And this is where kind of my memory problems come in, because I kind of have it blocked out too. I lost a pregnancy. It must have been in 2019. And then I had another chemical pregnancy after that. So we never seen the heartbeat, but I just had positive pregnancy tests. So that was my 4th pregnancy. And then my 5th pregnancy, we were going to do letrozole, because even though I was getting pregnant, I just couldn't stay pregnant. And then it went a while again and I couldn't get pregnant. And so that was in 2020, right when COVID was kicking off and crazy.
Yes.
And so I had my prescription for letrozole, and we got exposed to COVID. One of my friends had popped positive, and we had just gone out to dinner with them because they had just lifted in Alaska, they had a hunker down order. So we were on hunker down, and we took everything very seriously. And then they lightened it, and we were allowed to go to restaurants. And then my friend is a doctor as well. We went out to dinner with her, and she probably got it from one of her patients, but then she was COVID positive. And then she called us and we're like, hey, she's COVID positive. So I was like, okay, we cannot do the treatments this month because we had no idea what COVID did to a pregnancy. It was so scary back then.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So we did not use the letrozole that month and still ended up pregnant. And that was my son, Edison, who is going to be 4 next month. And that was, the pregnancy physically was all fine. We moved from Alaska to Illinois when he was 2 weeks old. And so that was, a wild experience. Don't recommend moving with a newborn. 0 out of 10. The baby was sweet and perfect. I kept telling everybody he has to be the calm to our storm. And he was a super great little easy baby. Still is the sweetest little boy. He's just a mama's boy. I love that kiddo. And then we moved down here. I finished up grad school and I got pregnant again right when I started at the VA. So I started at the VA in October of 2022, and I lost another pregnancy. Yeah. I was trying to be super relaxed about that one and just be like, nope, I don't want to do 48-hour HCGs, because, every pregnancy that I've had has just been like all the ultrasounds, all the labs, all this. And I was like, nope, we're going to do this one super chill. It's fine. I have a positive pregnancy test. I called the doctor. They're like, do you want to do ultrasound? I'm like, nope, we're good. They're like, okay, let's bring you in, get your HCG levels drawn. Do you want to do 48-hour quants to see if they improve, right? And I was like, nope, just do once. Let's make sure it's positive and call it good. And so that's how that one went. And then I started bleeding and lost that one and passed it on my own. And then I got pregnant again just like the very next month. Yeah. And that one, I was like, okay, we're doing everything again. We're going to do the quants. The quants were doubling appropriately. And I went in for an ultrasound and everything looked good. And then I went in for another ultrasound, was appropriately sized gestational sac, but there wasn't an embryo in it.
Okay.
And they're like, it's okay. And I was like, nope, it's a loss. And they're like, well, we're going to check it again in a week. And I was like, schedule the DNC. Like mentally, I cannot handle this again. I can't do it. Schedule the DNC. I was like, well, I'll come in and do another ultrasound in a week, like you're asking me to, but I want the DNC on the surgery books because I'm not waiting for it. I cannot do this. A nurse listened to me and she's like, okay, we'll put you on the surgery books. I was like, you can cancel the surgery, but just put me on the books. And then I went in for a follow-up ultrasound a week later and nothing had grown. So there was still no embryo. So it's an anembryonic pregnancy. And so then I had a DNC for that one. So I've had 3 DNCs, and then the other ones have passed on their own. So, and then mentally, I was pretty worn out. And so we tried for a little while, and then I was like, you know what, Trav, we're happy. We have 2. I don't want to go through another pregnancy. I just can't go through another loss. I don't want to do this anymore. And he's like, okay, fine. And we had always agreed that he would have a vasectomy and that would be our birth control when we were done having kiddos. And he scheduled the vasectomy at the time. He was still in the military and he went through it. You had to have a briefing and stuff like that for that procedure.
Sure.
And then he was getting retired as well. And so his retirement date and his surgery date were in the same week. And he's like, too much. I can't handle it all. We're going to push the vasectomy and I'll get it done as a civilian. And I was like, sure, no problem. Totally understand. Mental health first. Let's support you through this major change of retirement. And so he got an appointment. He retired in December and he got an appointment for May in the civilian medical system. And then I ended up pregnant with my baby who's in the other room right now. He's just a newborn. I'm on maternity leave right now. So we say that he was meant to be. Yeah, the absolute last time that I ovulated before my husband's vasectomy. So I was 6 weeks pregnant when he got his vasectomy done. And I found out on Mother's Day last year. So, yeah, but he is so sweet. We're so happy he's here. And I had the most beautiful labor and delivery with him. I literally laughed him out. I had an epidural and somebody made me laugh and he was born and I didn't really push at all. It was a great experience. I liked the OB team down here. I was worried because I was so close with my OBs up in Alaska. I was still texting with them when I got pregnant, early pregnancy with Easton as well. And so, but yeah, it was a beautiful, beautiful experience.
That's a lot. So you had told me ahead of time because I didn't keep track with you saying that you've had 9 pregnancies. And
9 pregnancies, 6 losses.
And 3 living children.
3 living children.
Beautiful.
We're 11 weeks, almost 4 and 7.
Oh, sounds like a beautiful, beautiful family. A lot to go through to achieve that. And a lot of what you have indicated several times there, the mental health piece of that. And I kind of can relate to that a little bit. I can remember, and of course this was 40-something years ago. I guess really my last loss was probably about 28 years ago because my youngest daughter will be 40 next month. And the mental piece, I can remember with I had a loss between my 2 oldest daughter and then my 3rd daughter who was born with a birth defect, and then got pregnant again and lost that pregnancy. And I can vividly remember saying what you said. I can't do this anymore. I just can't mentally. And my husband was right with me on board. Like, we have now 3 healthy daughters, and, to go through her, the youngest having a birth defect and then a loss, it was like, this is it. Done. No more. We cannot emotionally, mentally go through anymore. So let's talk just a few minutes about how did you, as a therapist now or counselor, how do you continue to, and even during that time, one of the things that you said that I want to emphasize that is the support you had, which is so important to have that. But what else helped support you during that time, through the grief, because there's a huge amount of grief and loss in your mental health. Like, what else did you do that you can share with the audience that would maybe support them as well?
So honestly, I didn't do well. When Elena was born, she was my first one that was the loss. I went back to work less than a week later, right?
Okay.
I did not grieve. I did not want to be a part of that. I wanted to just get busy, which can
It
help
happened.
some people. And then it wasn't until I got pregnant with Evelyn that I realized that, like, oh, I need to do some stuff here, because it was like on all my trauma, because, I served in the military. I have multiple deployments. All of my trauma, it was like the lid of the box came out. Like, I had everything compartmentalized, and I explain this a lot to my clients as well. You have trauma boxes. I have a trauma box here labeled this, and this one's here labeled this, and this one's here labeled this. And for a while, you can maintain all of them. They might shake, they might rattle, but they're up on their shelves and they're fine. And then one more thing comes through, and maybe it's an earthquake, or maybe you just trip and knock the shelves down, right? But those boxes come down and the lids come off and everything is jumbled. So I started having intrusive thoughts. I started having nightmares. And my sleep was always kind of really bad, but it got worse, right? And so when all of that started happening, I'm like, I need support. So when I was pregnant with Evelyn is when I started going to therapy weekly. And then I also, at the time, my insurance, which was through the VA, would pay for chiropractic adjustments. And when you got a massage at the chiropractor office, it was covered. So I got weekly adjustments and weekly massages. And I became so close with my massage therapist. She was just another part of my support team. She knew my whole history. She was very trauma informed. She had trauma informed training as a masseuse. And, I truly took care of myself through that pregnancy with weekly therapy. My boss was super supportive. He understood I had all the sick leave that I needed in the federal government. So I could go to therapy, I could go get an adjustment, and I could go get a massage every single week throughout that pregnancy. Right. So that's how I took care of myself in that time. And then also just talking to people. Like, I would share my story with others, and it also feels good for me to support others. And so my sister had a loss in that point in time. My best friend in Liz, the one who came, who was the namesake of Elena, she had a loss throughout that time. And so I was able to talk and support these women. And then I had a friend from childhood who I hadn't talked to. We graduated high school together, but she lost her baby right around 20 weeks as well. And she called me to be like, what do I do? And I was able to talk to her and support her. So just being able to share my experience with others was helpful for me to recover. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but just like talking about it. Talking about it.
Yeah. Doesn't sound crazy to me at all, because I hear that even with guests when I first started the podcast 5 years ago, how much sharing their story on the podcast was healing for them.
Mm-hmm.
Every time we share and speak about those things, there's healing that comes with that. So that doesn't sound crazy to me at all. I encourage everyone to make sure they have those people that they can continue to share their story with. And when you can share it and support someone else like you did,
Mm-hmm.
wow, there's a lot. There's a
Yeah.
lot of healing within that too. Yeah.
Being
Super
able
important.
to help somebody is what's most
Yes.
critical. I will
Yes.
say that, like, after each one of the losses, you know, the hormone, like, it's like I know what to do. And my mom happened to be here the October loss, and one of my cousins from out of state was here. And so we hadn't told anybody, and we were just having a bonfire in the backyard, and we were going to pumpkin farms and things like that. And I was just like, well, I walked down the stairs. I said, hey, you know, we hadn't shared yet, but I'm pregnant, but I just started bleeding. So I'm pretty sure this is going to be a loss. I just got to let you guys know. And they're like, well, what do you need? And I was like, I don't know. And they're like, well, do you want to sit around, like, relax? We can take the kids out of the house so you can have a quiet house, or do you want to come with us? And I was like, I think I want to go with you. Like, I've been here, done that. I've been through this before. And so they kept me busy, and we went to the pumpkin farm, and my cousin is, you know, she's my age, but she went down this giant slide at the farm, and I took a video of it, and she just, like, giggled like a child, and it was so funny that I could just use that, like, experience to get me through. And nobody, like, they knew I wanted distraction, and so they gave me distraction at that point in time, and so I was able to get through that one. And then my last one, when I had to have the DNC, I had no emotional attachment to that. It was like, I mean, it was a surgical procedure. I did not feel the hormone dump that normally comes for me. Like, I know what a loss feels like. It's, you have the physical loss, and then there's that hormone dump, and it's just like an emotional, like, after, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks after. And I never had that after the DNC. And it wasn't until I went on a healing retreat, because that's another thing that I've done. I went down to Costa Rica with some healers, and I was telling them my story, because the one was like, oh, pregnant, you know, she loves pregnancy. It was beautiful for her. And I was like, I love my kids and I love having newborns. I don't love pregnancy.
Yeah.
And then I just started telling them, and she was, as I was talking to this healer, she's like, you're so surgical about it. There was no emotional attachment to me telling this story. And she's like, you're just stuck there. And she totally nailed it, because I had not had any emotional release or grief or anything. And as soon as she said that, I bawled, and I had all these women just hugging me as I'm just bawling, right? Like, all of everything that I didn't have when I had the DNC. Because I had the DNC, I woke up and I was like, I feel fine. Like, let's go out to breakfast. My husband and I went to our favorite little brunch spot. And then my mom, of course, was here, because she's always here. And, you know, she had the kids, and she had dinner, my favorite meal cooked for me, and all that stuff. And I was just like, yeah, this is fine. It was like, it wasn't like a pregnancy loss at all. It was just like I went in and had, you know, some minor surgery done.
Totally
It was
disassociated from that.
Yeah, completely. But then I went to that healing retreat, and that's when I really processed and felt all the feelings. And that emotional dump happened.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So,
well, I think that's really important for people to hear, you know, that we can disassociate, we can stuff it down, we can put it in that box and put the lid on it.
Not eventually, though.
It's going to come out. And it was great that you were in a space with surrounded by healers, that's where, well, they help facilitate that for sure, you know, for that to happen. It was obvious they could tell that you had not processed that loss at all. So that was good that you were in a space that you could, with in a safe space, instead of the explosion or emotional coming out where there's not anyone around you.
Yeah.
That happens too.
Yeah.
For sure. And then you look for people like us, right, to help you. For sure. So I just want to thank you so much for coming on to share. I think this is going to be very beneficial for other women to hear. And that's what we want more than what we've already said is for it to help other people. And so just want to preface this too that, it's just so nice to know that even so many women go through so many struggles to become moms. And I'm sure you will say now, so worth all of that, even though very difficult. Don't want to take anything away from the difficult journey that you've been through and the so many losses that you've been through. This is airing during the month of May for motherhood, for Mother's Day. And so I'm sure it's been, well, just how you speak of your 3 living children and Elena, that motherhood is beautiful.
That's another thing that I do for my grief process as well is like my husband and I take Elena's birthday off every year and we do an adventure with the Peace Bear. So we have the Peace Bear and like photographs of whatever adventure we go on, and we kind of always celebrate that. And then one other thing that I didn't know about that took me off guard, even though I know so much about breastfeeding and labor and delivery and all that stuff that might be helpful, is when I was nursing Evelyn on Elena's trauma date, my milk supply completely tanked out. So like out of nowhere, seemingly out of nowhere, I knew it was Elena's birthday, but I did not know that it would affect my milk supply that much. So if there is a bereaved mom out there and she does have a baby that she's nursing through, that's just something to keep an eye on. Like your trauma date can totally affect your supply. So now that I know that, since I've nursed Edison through that, and now I have baby Easton as well, it's something that I can be ready for and kind of expect and plan around to make sure that I'm keeping my supply up during those times. But I remember being completely shocked by that when I went to the lactation consultant. I'm like, everything's been fine. It's been, so many months, and I used to get this many ounces and now I get like 2 in an entire day. And what do I do? And she's like going through all the things. And then it just clicked. I was like, oh, my first daughter was stillborn, like, and her birthday's tomorrow or something. She's like, oh yeah, honey. She's like, that's absolutely what's going on here. Like, take care of yourself, self-care, and it'll come back. And I'm like, oh, okay. So
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that does happen a lot when I'm talking to clients. They're like, I just don't feel right, something. And many times they don't make that association, and it could be 3 months to the day or 4 months or 6 months, but our bodies, our subconscious remembers that, and we may not even be aware of it until someone kind of says, well, start talking about it to make that connection. But I think that happens. That's for sure. No doubt about that. So anything else you'd like to share before we conclude that I did not ask a question about?
No, that just thought came in my mind because my husband just came by with the baby. I was like, oh yeah, I should say that's the one thing that threw me through a loop that I didn't know was going to happen.
Well, I think you've given a lot of good information, just in sharing your story and some tips for those that are experiencing that. So I want to thank you again so much for coming on and sharing with the audience your motherhood journey. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Female Voices Life and Loss. We hope today's conversation brought you comfort, insight, and a sense of community. Remember, you're not alone in this journey. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And if you found this episode helpful, Please share it with others who might need it. Stay connected, stay resilient, and until next time, keep growing and healing.